Hey, it's Freitag. In this podcast, we interview business owners in New Hampshire and beyond to get their perspective on work, growth, and of course, the weekend. Join our host, Freitag marketing owner Jan Ziegler, as he interviews fascinating guests. We hope you'll enjoy this episode.
And I was jealous.
You were jealous?
I was like, can I come to the break session so I can get out of the cookies bowl?
Welcome to It's Freitag. I'm Jan, and today I'm here with Caroline Tremblay from Allen Pen Writing. Caroline's a really active part of this community in all sorts of creative ways, and we'll talk about this today a little bit. So welcome, Caroline.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I want to start a little bit by asking you about your business, Allen Pen Writing, which seems to be like an entire collective of writers and creatives. And maybe you can tell us a bit about, how that came to be and what do you guys do?
Absolutely. It's been kind of an organic process because I actually used to be a classroom teacher many moons ago. And when I decided to start having my own family and sort of transition to something new, I really went back to my writing roots because I have an English degree and writing was always something that I loved. And so at the time, the Keene Sentinel right here in Keene was just starting their new lifestyle magazine called Elf, which is now the main lifestyle insert that they have. And the president was kind enough to meet with me at Prime Roast and give me a shot at writing articles for them. And it went from there. So I started writing from an economic table and the business journal. And through that, met all of these really cool local business owners. And it's tough to have that just be a one-off, right? There's so many good stories around here. So the more I talked with people, the more we were interested in the idea of doing that for their websites, doing that for their social media, helping them tell that in other ways in print. And that was just really fun for me and became perfect with a young family and all of that. But during COVID, so many businesses needed to do that very quickly and get online really fast. So we started doing more and more and more of it. And that's where a lot of the other writers and creatives came in. Right now, we have a small network of local freelance writers, and almost all are work from home parents, which is really cool. So it's also providing income for other folks who are in that young family situation. And it also prevents a resume gap if you're a talented professional, but you've chosen to be home at least part-time with kids. So it really serves a great purpose in that way. And then because we live where we live, we're so fortunate to call in photographers and sound engineers and all these other talented creatives when we need them to tell the story.
Thank you. So really at the core of Allen Pen is content in like any shape or form, whether it's, written word, photos, social media, newsletters, like it encompasses all of that.
Yes. Yeah. We specialize in the written part and the messaging, and then that has blossomed into a fair amount of what we call light design. So none of us are professional designers, but we do a lot of that to accompany the writing, and we call in a lot of photography from local places. And we really recommend this more holistic picture. So instead of getting sort of stuck in trying to promote your business in one avenue, we try to have that writing spread out in different places so that you're building your email list and you're connecting with people on social all at the same time.
That's really cool. And so what type of businesses or nonprofits outside of, for example, the Sentinel work with you or you work with for marketing, content marketing?
That's
basically?
Such a great question. So it's always kind of like do because we consider ourselves ghostwriters. Yeah. So the fun part about it is that we do all this behind the scenes. And then most of the time the business owner can just say like, oh, yes. I'm fantastic at that. And I've been doing it all, which is a nice feeling for them. And I think a big confidence booster, right? As a small business owner myself, you kind of take for granted how much that presence enables you to feel confident and excited in your business so that you can get into the real work that you do. So many of the ones that we work with, we have a small niche retailers who are here. We have foodie folks, farmers, HR consultants, nonprofit leaders. It really ranges quite a bit. Some educational institutions. And I'm trying to think what else. Oh, our most recent, this has been really cool. We started working with a small independent publisher out of Portsmouth. And so we have had the honor of representing several authors who have just launched their books this fall. And that's kind of a new area for us, but also really exciting. And some of the books are really taking off, which is great.
That's really awesome. And so does it take you a long time in terms of researching all these different industries and fields that you work on, understanding the language, the terminology, to basically put that all together? Or how do you find all of that information?
That's such a great question. We really treat it on a case-by-case basis because we want to work with people in the way that feels best for them and make it less stressful, right? We're small business owners. We don't want to impose any guidelines that are going to make it harder for them or more work. So what we find often, some people are really great about getting on the phone once a month or weekly if they feel more comfortable. And they, as the subject matter experts, will give us this sort of big knowledge explosion. And then we can take that and tailor it and break it into chunks and messaging that makes sense. So we do those big kind of downloads, and there's a lot of supplementary research, right? So if we get the framework from people, then we're researching language and things like that. And I always warn new clients that there is that sort of calibration time at the beginning, because I think the trick about writing for other brands is being able to switch voices like that. And that's why I'm always so impressed with the writers I work with, because that's a skill set alone, being able to pivot back and forth between authentic voices. So it takes a little bit to get that. In the first few weeks, we'll really ask clients to be kind of aggressive about saying no, we don't ever use that word, or we would absolutely use this, or this doesn't sound like me. And then I would say after the first couple of weeks, usually it's pretty smooth. There's minimal changes, and they're just adding in things like, oh, I forgot to tell you that this is something we love or something we offer.
That's really cool. And so you combine all of this business work with still being a writer frequently for the Sentinel, for different, more in-depth articles and pieces that you then do all the research on, and you conduct all the interviews. How do you balance both things? Because one is probably more putting out social media content and newsletters, like smaller pieces of content more frequently, and then the other one is these larger, more in-depth pieces.
That's a really great question, because sometimes the balance is hard because the timing of that kind of work is very different. The larger pieces need that much deeper work for larger chunks of time. And so the way I block my schedule can get a little tricky. Sometimes I lose that sort of rhythm when I haven't had an article deadline in a while. And so I'm in this much smaller chunks of time rhythm. And then I'll have a stack of deadlines with articles where it's whoa, baby. But I've tried to get good about, I find a lot of the front loading is the interview work and really taking the time. I want those to be open and flowing and comfortable for people. I don't ever want to be rushing an interview or forcing it into a schedule. Oftentimes I'm interviewing policy leaders and other business owners and nonprofit leaders, and it can be tough to schedule time with those folks. So I try to really do those way out ahead, even a month ahead of the article, so that there's plenty of time to talk with them and sort of sit with the information and figure out how the piece is going to come together from all the different angles. And then those pieces come together pretty well after that, I find. There's good synergy, and I sort of schedule the smaller pieces around it and make these larger times for deep work.
Okay, that's so cool. And for your more journalistic work, maybe you can talk about one of your recent stories that you wrote or an article that really was meaningful to you.
Let's see. There are a couple recent ones that have really stuck with me. There was one piece that I wasn't expecting to be such a deep dive, and it was so cool. It was about this historic place in New Hampshire called the Shinbone Shack, which is such a great name. It was for Monadnock Table magazine. And it turned out to be this amazing story of a woman back in the 20s who came up here and loved the remoteness and sort of beguiled her way into having local neighbors build the structure for her. And her vision was to have it be like an Adirondack great camp. So it was pretty extravagant, I guess. And then when the Depression happened, she lost all of her money and the property just sort of sat and fell into disrepair. And it went through all these iterations over the years of being like a camp, of being privately owned. And no one ever really took it and got it to the ultimate vision that she had carried until this family came along and they purchased it. I don't recall how many years ago now, but they've done just massive work on restoring what became the main lodge and then also these sort of subsequent properties that are out around it. And they live there full time, but they also use it strategically for a very limited number of events a year to continue fueling the stewardship so that they can do projects and sort of keep telling her story that way, which is really neat.
That is super fascinating. And I think there's a number of properties, great houses, manors around here that just have incredible stories, like Aldworth Manor and Harrisville. Like that alone should be a magazine. And has that article been published yet?
Yes. Okay. So that one came out, I want to say that was actually the fall edition. And that was sort of blended in. The other ones that are top of mind for me are all the Radically Rural articles I get to write. And so the Radically Rural Summit, hosted by the Hannah Grimes Center for Entrepreneurship and the Keene Sentinel, took place in September. And prior to that, in the months leading up, I get to write articles about all these rural issues, but also the solutions that people are finding across the country. So those interviews are particularly special because I get to talk to people from all over who are doing these really innovative things in their communities. And then it's fun to come back and talk to people here about what I heard.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. So what's 2025? We're at the end of 2024. It's mid-December. What do you have in store for Allen Penn for next year? Like, do you have any grand plans that you're already like working on, or you're just gonna sort of see what happens?
That's a good question. So we have definitely been seeing more of the author crowd and also a stronger nonprofit thread, which I really like. So I think those are two areas where we'll be kind of leaning in. We're trying to do some more teaching around that so that people can be informed. We work with a crowd where some of them often are weighing whether they should tackle some of this themselves, or they maybe feel guilty about not tackling it themselves. And so we're doing a lot of talking and educating around you absolutely can, and this is how you do it. Or sometimes the more strategic thing as an entrepreneur or as a growing organization is to have that done for an affordable rate so that you can focus on the work that you're doing, because as we know, it's so easy to get drawn away from your main focus. So we're trying to do more workshops and things of that nature to sort of help people with decision making around it. And then also on a personal note, I'm working on my first novel this year, and I just won a grant from Arts Alive.
That was my next question. I wanted to ask you about that because I read the announcement last week. Yeah. About that Arts Alive micro grant for artists in the region, which is, I think a fascinating and incredible opportunity for local artists to get small grants to get their projects done. So want to tell us about it?
Absolutely. Well, it's so neat, and it is really cool to see the list of artists who won. There's bands that are going to be recording and visual artists, and someone is opening like a small artisan shop in Hancock, I think, that I need to get out to. That looks really amazing. But yeah, it was an awesome opportunity. So they have a chunk of money each year, and then local artists can apply. And I've never really been in a position where it was my own personal creative work in the last several years. But this year, I have had this novel that is sticking with me. And it's not the first time I've attempted one, but this one seems to be hanging around, which I love. And I have a good chunk of pages. But the thing that's really been a struggle is because I have a home-based office, it is very hard to switch gears with that and set aside time for creative writing when there's so much I can be doing for the businesses we work with. So I wrote to Arts Alive and said, wow, I would really love to be part of this mini grant program because I would love to go on retreat and really do this in a focused way. And the plan is to use the funds that I received to fund a retreat weekend at a farm stay, hopefully, so I can also be simultaneously supporting someone local. And then the novel itself has a lot to do with placemaking and being in rural spaces and what it takes to create an actual community gathering place that people treat as a third place. So my hope is to do it somewhere where one of those exists. And we were talking about this earlier. I think maybe like a Harrisville General Store or the Putney General Store is a great example of that. Dublin also has an awesome one. And then, of course, like the Brewbaker's Nova art scene, but I'm there all the time. So I'm already a regular observer of what's happening there.
These places of community around here in these small towns, they've been around for so long and they've gone through iterations. And I feel like, for example, Keene almost doesn't have enough of it. I mean, we have Birdies now, new business open, exciting. Which I still have yet to go to.
That's good.
But I think they really make a community. Like it's, Brewbakers on most days, it's just really vibrant and really buzzing. And it's really wonderful to have that because I think otherwise, our downtown is quiet during a weekday morning. And and we need those places in our communities. Can we talk about what's in the book, or do you not want to talk about
We
it?
can. It's so like strikingly different
Yeah.
from my business work that it's gotten a little funny to talk about it. But also, right, you have to talk about creative projects if they're going to come and be real live things.
Yeah.
And so this one is actually a cozy romance. I was reading a couple of books, like light books over the last few years that friends had given to me, like, oh, this is a quick read. And I just love that sort of like tone and the lightness and the ease of it and the play and fun in it. But the other thing is that my hope is that I can attempt to do this in a way that it reads like that, but it has some of these other rural threads tied in. So you get these classic Hallmark small town stories, right? And typically it's like some woman from the big city comes and then, her neighbor happens to be. So I'm hoping to do it a little more justice here, that when the main character gets there, she is seeing that there are all of these true valuable things, but also some of the struggles of rural life, and that building community is an action. It's not something that you stumble into and get like adopted, like, yay, you're here.
We've all been waiting for you.
That's exactly. So like you get there and then you have to be part of it. And so that's been the tricky part. Many of the characters that live in the town seem to just come to me. Maybe that's because I live in a rural area. And then this sort of, initial interloper, I'm having more trouble with her. I keep changing her profession and like why she's there and what she's going to be doing.
Like by the Hallmark playbook, she clearly needs to be in PR, and he needs to own like a Christmas tree farm.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, he is a baker, so sorry, that one's kind of classic. But he's gonna have more layers. Oh, I know. In the city, she should be a professional musician, maybe like a violinist or something in the orchestra. And then when she gets there, maybe she's like a fiddler. She gets like a down home twist on her music. I was like, oh, I totally dig this.
Yeah.
I don't play music, so any of my musician friends will probably feel like I'm a stalker soon, because I'm going to be asking them, what would it feel like to use your instrument in a different way, I guess?
Yeah. Yeah, I can't help with that. No.
It's too bad my brother isn't a professional musician and sound engineer.
So I think my final businessy question that I have, just because, I think then we want to switch gears a little bit and talk about what's your weekend like.
Let's do it.
Would be, what advice would you give to people here in the region, starting their businesses? Because I think, in one way we have a lot of resources for rural town, right? Hannah Grime Center and all they do is absolutely incredible. And the chamber has resources and there's an active community. But what would be your starting point? I think probably with a marketing twist.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so hard too, because it really spans, right? So like a restaurant owner has very different concerns than anything I have built. But I really think there are a couple things I observe. One is that I think building your presence from the get-go, even if that feels intimidating, it's so powerful, because that's slow organic growth, like drip, drip, drip over time. It really adds up versus leaving that until later, trying to start your business. And then later when you are active, you're sort of missing all of those foundational tools, right? Like maybe you don't have a mailing list, so you can't get in touch with your people. Or you got too hung up on your logo, so there's no way to represent your business when you suddenly need to be collaborating. That comes up a lot, I think, right? Someone gets invited to do some great event and they don't have a logo or brand colors or any of the things they need. So just establishing a baseline and knowing that can evolve later. You can rebrand, you can update things, you can make them more polished, but getting them in place from the get-go so that you can constantly be putting them out there to people is really important. And I also think that trusting a little bit in that slow growth. I think we're in a culture where we expect things to happen really fast and immediately. And especially when you're juggling money with a startup, right? Depending on your approach, you might not be pouring all of that into marketing at the beginning. You might be pouring it into your infrastructure and hiring and other things like that. So knowing that not every single social media post has to be a viral win, and not every newsletter has to be this tome on what's happening. It's more to me about the consistency and the communication and being present and being real with your audience so that people know you're there, they know what's going on with your business, and they know you're active.
I think that is really brilliant advice. I always say, like, just start talking to people, because I think there's, in most spaces, so many supportive people with so much expertise around here that, like, if you can just get the word out, you're going to start running into people that can help you solve these small little challenges that we have all day and every day. Cool. Well, thank you. And now we want to switch gears a little bit. It's Freitag. Freitag, obviously the name of our agency, and means Friday in German. And we want to also talk a little bit about, what a good weekend looks like here in the Monadnock region, because I think really what stands out here is the balance of work and life. And I have young children. I know you have young children. And I know, a lot of our weekends are consumed by young children and all that they need so they can get, through their week. But maybe start by telling me, what does the ideal weekend for you look like? I know it's December and it's cold outside, and hiking Mount Monadnock is not really a thrilling idea at least for me. But yeah, why don't you share a little bit about your weekend?
Well, it's funny that you should lead with that, because I've actually become a little bit obsessed with the idea of more winter hiking this winter.
Okay.
I don't know why, but I've been testing different base layers. And another mom at the school that we go to, she just lent me some of her trekking poles so that I can test those out. I've never trekked with poles. So yeah, that's actually on my list of ideal things, but I'm hoping to start a little bit flatter than Mount Monadnock until I get myself in order, and then maybe test some babies like Mount Caesar or Mount Watatic. The kids are not super into winter hiking, although we're lucky enough to live in a nature reserve where we live in Richmond. And so we actually have trails built into our community, which is fun because we can hike right there, and they love it. They know the trails. They can pick out the blazes. They have their own stops, and there's little footbridges. But also you bump into neighbors in the woods and things like that, which is kind of cool. So hiking's on that list, but also for me, big ones would be, I love local food. So anytime I can get out for a good brunch, or I was just at 21 the other weekend and candied walnut waffles. It was ridiculous.
That sounds really yummy.
It was very good and decadent. And I also really love to see live music when I can. So we were actually at Nova Arts the other night. We saw the Rear Defrosters for a little networking night. And a few weeks ago, I got to test out the new restaurant Plated in Brattleboro, which was
I heard.
phenomenal. And then I went to see a jazz show at the Cotton Mill, which was really cool. I'd never been to that space.
I always find it very interesting how the Connecticut River is the river of death between what's happening in Brattleboro and in Keene, or the Monadnock region as a whole. And it's so funny how many people never consider going to Brattleboro for dinner. It's almost like this, huge divide that we can't cross to make it over there.
It's been kind of the blessing of living in Richmond. People are always like, where do you live?
Yeah.
Because Richmond, I think, has about 800 or 1,000 people total. It's really small. But as far out as it is, it kind of positions you equidistant. So to get to Brattleboro is just as much as coming to Keene for us, because you can go right through Winchester and Hinsdale, and the same for Peterborough. And so in a way, it's forced me to use all the places a little more consistently, because it's going to be the same drive anyway. So where do I really want to go? What am I trying to access? And
we live in Westmoreland, and so for us, Brattleboro tends to be closer than Keene. Anyways, back to your weekend. So you talked about Nova Arts for live music and hiking and the outdoors. I think they're all the cornerstones of what's going on here. How do you feel about, with your younger kids, about activities for your young families? And do you feel like there's enough to do, especially in the winter?
We struggle on weekends because I find there's often too many things to choose from. We all want to do different things, and so we have to narrow it down. And that stays pretty consistent in the winter for us, mostly because we are an outdoor family. The kids are too. They go to Gathering Waters. It's a heavily outdoor school. So we have the gear. We're ready. So we still do a lot outdoors. We try to snowshoe and go out to some of the different trails that we're used to and get around. But also, I think there's a lot of resources. My kids love the Children's Museum. So winter is a great time to go there. We also, our library in Richmond is so fantastic and has a really vibrant kids room. But they also have a knitting club on Saturdays with all of these lovely ladies. And my daughter knits because she goes to Gathering Waters. So we go to knitting club on Saturdays. They have these huge bins of Legos. So my son will dig into those, and we hang out at the library. And So we find a lot of those things. Occasionally, when you were talking about where you live too, I was thinking it's a really good thing that I don't live on that end of the neighborhood, because I could spend my whole life at Burdick's. And so like if we're having a really cold, wintry, lonely, boring day, we either drive to Burdick's to get, drinking chocolate, which fixes everything. Yeah. Or we'll also go to Wilton, to House by the Side of the Road, which is like an enormous indoor greenhouse space that stays open year round. And they have koi fish and turtles and fresh popcorn, and it's ridiculous. And so if we're feeling really sad and we need a good dose of like green, we'll go there and wander around, and then we'll hit Ben's Sugar Shack for lunch and eat maple stuff. And then, once you roll into that time of year too, there's like Snow and Ice Festival, maple season. So we're right back at it in February and March with all the things.
Yeah. They should give you a role at like promoting the region.
Man.
It's like you're like, and here's everything you can do this weekend. And that's funny, right? Because you also write a magazine, which we haven't talked about, but I think we should dedicate 5 minutes to. Awesome. Because you write a seasonal digital magazine called The Monad Knocker, and that's basically what you talk about, right? What is happening? What can you do? Whether you are, young and you want to go out and find cultural arts, family things, like a little bit for everybody, right?
Yeah, that's the hope. We really try to span like music, family activities, food, arts, all those things. And hopefully with the appeal that it works really well for locals who may or may not know about these things, but also for tourists. So if someone's researching the region and stumbles across it, then boom, you have your whole playlist, is what we call it, whimsically, for whatever season you're coming to the region in. And we keep them all archived too, so that you can go back. Maybe there's nothing on this particular winter season one that speaks to you, but you can go back to any of the years, and most of those things are still in play.
I love it. So right now we're in the winter playlist.
We're in the holiday. That will kind of span through this early winter part. And then I think the next one comes out late February or March and kind of carries us through the spring. And they are seasonal, so it's quarterly. And we have 10 items on each list. So every season you can check it out.
That's really cool. But back to your weekend. And how do you balance work and life? Do you find it easier than maybe in a more urban area? Or what are the challenges? I find it challenging sometimes to find after school care. We don't have a ton of close family around here. So finding those solutions that fill in the gaps, like that's, I think, a big downside here. And I end up, especially on teacher workshop days, like last week, we end up with kids in the office.
Yeah, I struggle with this a lot just because of this season of life. I don't know that it ever feels super balanced, right? You're switching from like washing woolies to get ready for the winter week ahead to writing an intensive piece on rural solutions. So it is hard to switch that brain space back and forth. And I feel like that is the tricky part, is that it involves a lot of switching gears more often in a day than you would in a traditional role where you do work and then you do life. I'm really fortunate because my whole puzzle actually does hinge on family. I left here because I was like, this place is so lame, I'll never live here. And then quickly discovered that it's awesome and came back. I grew up in Ringe, so my mom and dad are still here. My brother lives in Joffrey with his wife. And so we have a lot of support with family stuff. My mom graciously picks up the kids from school like 4 days a week. So after I drop them off in the morning, I can go back to Richmond and work for most of the day, which is pretty amazing. We have taken advantage of Stonewall Farm. We'll do a lot of those workshop day camps or, the vacation week ones that are helpful. So I keep my eye out for those too sometimes.
Yeah, I think the biggest benefit is how close everything's together. I know Richmond's a little bit out there, but I think here in Keene, at least, everything's a 6-minute drive at the most. And so like picking a kid up from school real quick, bringing him back to the office and going, or going to the store real quick, like all of those things, at least you can get done really fast. And I really appreciate that. And there's never traffic. And those are the things that whenever I'm in the city, I'm quickly reminded of why I didn't like the city.
I think it is nice. It's that having the best of both worlds again, because Richmond's a little bit more of a hike, but you, just like Westmoreland, you get the countryside, and then we come into town almost every day, so I can get anything I need when I'm here and then buzz back and work in my home office and be mostly undisturbed unless there's like wildlife happening outside.
Well, I think we're nearing the end of our episode here. Is there anything you'd like to mention, maybe upcoming news for Alan Penn, anything that you want to share that we haven't covered yet?
That's such a great question. I feel like we covered most of what's been shaking around my end, but I'm just really grateful to be here. And I should mention that I love that we've had this collaboration and that there are so many other business owners that I feel really comfortable hanging out with, bouncing ideas around with. And that's a really big plus for me. I feel that here.
Cool. So thank you, Caroline. I really appreciate your time. Maybe you want to, give a quick note on how people can find you if they want to and how to reach you best.
Absolutely. So the best places are probably online at owlandpenwriting.com. And you can also give a call at 603-593-2016. And lastly, I guess I'd love for you to check out the monadknocker.com for our seasonal goodies. I think that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, that was a great conversation. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give us a nice review wherever you're listening to this. It really means the world. And our episodes drop every Friday, so stay tuned for more insightful chats from It's Freitag.